The date is 1 September 1939. The world wakes up to a new and terrifying reality. The slow and static trench warfare of the past is gone forever. A new beast is unleashed upon the fields of Europe. It is loud, it is mechanical, it is absolutely merciless. The German military machine crosses the Polish border. The sky instantly darkens with aircraft. The terrifying scream of the Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers fills the air. They have wind-driven sirens attached to their landing gear. These sirens are called the Jericho trumpets. They wail with a deafening screech as the planes drop from the clouds. The sound alone is designed to shatter the psychology of the defenders below. Men cover their ears and freeze in pure panic. Then, the bombs hit. Below the screaming skies, the ground begins to violently shake. Steel tracks chew up the dirt. Massive formations of Panzer tanks roll forward in a synchronized wave of destruction. They do not stop to secure the territory. They do not wait for the slow-moving infantry to catch up. They punch deep holes straight through the enemy defense lines. They race forward to cut communication wires and destroy supply chains. This is Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Speed is the ultimate weapon. Speed is the only rule that matters. The Polish army fights back with incredible bravery. They launch desperate counterattacks. But courage alone cannot stop hardened Krupp steel. The German strategy is a massive shock to the nervous system of the enemy command. Everything happens too fast. Polish generals cannot issue orders because the front line is constantly moving. By the time an order is given, the situation has already completely changed. The German tanks surround entire divisions. They create pockets of chaos. But there is a very dark and hidden secret behind this impossible speed. Human bodies have limits. Men need rest to function. Soldiers need sleep to survive. But the German High Command finds a chemical way to cheat human biology. The secret weapon of the Blitzkrieg is a small white pill. It is called Pervitin. Today, we know this chemical compound as crystal methamphetamine. The military factories mass produce this drug. They distribute over 35 million pills to the soldiers on the front lines. The effect is immediate and terrifying. The young men driving the tanks do not sleep for 2 days. Some do not sleep for 3 or even 4 days straight. Their eyes are wide open and staring blankly ahead. Their pupils are massive. They feel absolutely no pain. They feel no hunger. They feel no fear. They lose their sense of human empathy. They become organic extensions of the machines they drive. A tank commander pushes his crew for 48 hours without a single break. When they start to collapse, they chew another Pervitin pill and keep driving into the dark. The illusion of superhuman German strength is born right here in the dust of Poland. The young soldiers are completely high on meth. The senior commanders are completely high on the illusion of easy victory. Poland falls in a matter of weeks. The entire world watches in absolute horror. But the real and ultimate test is still waiting in the West. The year is now 1940. France possesses the largest and most respected land army in all of Europe. They have built the Maginot Line. It is a massive and incredibly expensive system of concrete bunkers and heavy artillery pointing towards Germany. The French generals sit in their comfortable headquarters. They think they are perfectly safe. They prepare their minds for a slow and defensive war, just like in 1914. They look at the strategic maps on their tables. They look at the dense Ardennes forest. They confidently decide that no modern army can drive heavy tanks through such thick woods and narrow dirt roads. They are fatally wrong. The German panzer divisions drive straight into the thick trees of the Ardennes. It creates a massive traffic jam of steel and exhaust fumes stretching for miles. If the Allied bombers attacked at this exact moment, the German army would be completely destroyed. But the French command structure is too slow and too rigid to react. The German tanks suddenly break out of the forest like a mechanical nightmare. General Heinz Guderian pushes his panzers forward at maximum speed. They race across the French countryside, heading straight for the English Channel. They slice the Allied armies cleanly in half. The speed of the advance is terrifying. The British army is pushed to the edge of the sea and trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk.
The powerful French army completely collapses from within. The psychological trauma is absolute and paralyzing. The French military leadership simply cannot comprehend what is happening around them. The brutal War of 1914 lasted for 4 long years of bloody stalemate. The battle for France in 1940 is effectively decided in just a few chaotic days. Paris falls without a fight. The unthinkable reality becomes true.
The final humiliation takes place in the dark woods of Compiègne. Hitler demands that the surrender document is signed in the exact same railway carriage where Germany was forced to surrender in 1918. He steps out of the carriage and literally dances a small jig of joy. It is a moment of pure historical revenge. He deeply humiliates the French nation. To the world and to his own people, he looks like an invincible god of war. The German public begins to believe he is a flawless military genius. More dangerously, the German generals begin to believe their own propaganda.
This is the exact moment the fatal flaw is permanently embedded in the German military machine. They begin to think that Blitzkrieg will work perfectly against any enemy on Earth. They think they can conquer the entire globe in a matter of weeks. They fail to realize that the fall of France was a rare and perfect storm of extreme luck, massive drug use, and terrible enemy leadership. The heavy seed of their future destruction is planted deep within this easy victory. They start to believe they are truly untouchable.
But military reality is cold and unforgiving. Gods of war do not need secure supply lines. Invincible armies do not run out of fuel. The chemical high of the millions of Pervitin pills will eventually wear off. The physical and psychological comedown will be incredibly brutal. The extreme arrogance born in the summer of 1940 will drag millions of young men to their frozen graves in the East. The illusion of absolute invincibility is now complete. The grand stage is perfectly set for the greatest and most violent military disaster in human history.
The date is 22 June 1941. The sun is not yet risen over the eastern borders of the German Reich. The morning air is cold and perfectly still. Over 3 million German soldiers are waiting in the dark forests and fields. They are about to launch Operation Barbarossa. It is the largest and most destructive military invasion in the entire history of human existence. The target is the vast and mysterious Soviet Union. The German High Command expects another fast and easy victory, just like in France. They genuinely believe they just need to kick the front door in and the whole rotten Soviet structure will crash to the ground. Right on the borderline sits a massive and outdated 19th century brick structure. It is the Brest Fortress. It is built on a star-shaped island, surrounded by muddy rivers. The German generals look at their expensive pocket watches. They expect to capture this old, crumbling fortress in exactly 12 hours.
The mighty 45th Infantry Division is assigned to clear the area before lunch. They are confident veterans of the French campaign. They march with their chests puffed out. They think this will be a very simple morning exercise.
At exactly 3:15 in the morning, the eastern sky suddenly turns a violently bright red. Thousands of German artillery guns open fire at the exact same second. The ground shakes with a terrifying and unnatural violence. The heavy explosive shells crash directly into the thick brick walls of the fortress. The Germans use massive siege mortars that fire monstrous shells weighing over 2,000 kilograms. The noise is completely deafening and physically painful. Inside the fortress, there are about 8,000 Soviet soldiers. They are completely surprised by the firestorm. Many of them are sleeping deeply in their beds. They have their wives and small children living inside the military base. The main sleeping barracks are destroyed in the very first minutes of the terrible bombardment. Thick dust and hot fire fill the dark corridors.
The German infantry soldiers cross the shallow river in small rubber boats. They walk slowly and casually. They expect to find only dead bodies and a few terrified survivors begging to surrender. They walk right into the open courtyard of the old fortress with absolute arrogance. Then, the impossible happens. The heavy black smoke clears slightly, and the ruined brick walls begin to spit fire. The surviving Soviet soldiers do not raise their hands. They do not run away in blind panic. They dig themselves out of the rubble. They pick up their dirty rifles and they start shooting back.
fight with a desperate and truly savage fury. The German infantry is caught completely off guard, standing in the middle of the open courtyard. They are instantly cut down by heavy machine gun fire coming from the dark basement windows. The easy morning exercise suddenly turns into a very bloody meat grinder.
The Soviet defenders are completely cut off from the outside world. They have absolutely no radio connection to their high command in Moscow. They do not know that the rest of the massive German army is already pushing hundreds of kilometers deep into Soviet territory. They only know that they are soldiers and they must hold the line. They lock themselves securely inside the thick basements and deep underground tunnels of the fortress. The days slowly and painfully turn into weeks. The heat of the summer sun is absolutely unbearable. The main water supply pipes inside the fortress are completely destroyed by the bombs. The trapped Soviet soldiers and their families are slowly dying of extreme thirst. The rivers are just a few meters outside the walls, but German machine guns watch the water day and night. Any desperate soldier who tries to crawl to the river with a small bucket is instantly shot in the head. The defenders are forced to drink dirty water squeezed from the muddy ground. They eat raw grain from the ruined military storehouses.
Their ammunition is running dangerously low, but every time the heavily armed Germans try to storm the basements, they are violently thrown back by fierce hand-to-hand combat. The fighting in the dark becomes deeply personal and incredibly brutal. Men fight with sharp bayonets, heavy metal shovels, and even their bare hands in the pitch-black tunnels. They cannot see each other, but they can smell the sweat and the blood. The German commanders are deeply embarrassed and furious about this situation. A single, outdated brick fortress is holding up an entire elite infantry division. They bring in heavier weapons. The German Air Force drops a massive 1,800-kilogram aerial bomb directly on the main building. The massive explosion completely crushes the central defense point. The shockwave breaks the bones of the men hiding underground. But still, small groups of starving, deafened, and bleeding Soviet soldiers continue to fight from the deep cellars.
They fight for 30 long and agonizing days.
They fight until they have absolutely no bullets left in their magazines. In the deep dark, they write final messages on the brick walls using their own blood and pieces of sharp rock. One unknown soldier writes a simple and deeply haunting message on the wall. He writes that he is dying, but he will never surrender to the enemy, and he says a final farewell to his homeland. The exact date carved heavily into the brick next to his message is 20 July 1941. That is almost a full month after the massive invasion began. The stubborn defense of the Brest fortress has absolutely no strategic value in the grand scale of the global war. The fast German panzers are already marching rapidly towards the gates of Moscow. But psychologically, it is a massive and terrifying earthquake for the German military mind. It is the very first time they look directly into the eyes of this new enemy and see pure, unyielding stubbornness. The Soviet soldiers do not fight like the broken French or the overwhelmed Polish armies. They fight like cornered wolves, bleeding in a trap. They fight far past the point of all military logic and human reason. They fight violently when all hope of rescue is completely gone. This small and incredibly bloody battle in the ruined brick tunnels is a very dark prophecy. It is a tiny and terrifying preview of the absolute hell that is waiting for the mighty German army in the endless frozen plains of the East. The beautiful illusion of a fast and clean war is shattered forever against the bloody red walls of Brest. The real slaughter of millions has only just begun.
The year is 1940. France has completely fallen. The British army is trapped on an island. They have left all their heavy weapons and tanks burning on the beaches of Dunkirk. They are entirely alone and completely vulnerable. Adolf Hitler stands on the coast of France and looks across the narrow strip of cold water. He wants to cross the sea and march his victorious army straight into London. But he knows that the powerful British Navy controls the water. He cannot send transport ships across the sea unless the sky above is perfectly safe. He needs absolute control of the air. Hermann Göring steps forward to take the glory. He is the supreme commander of the German Air Force. He is a bloated and incredibly arrogant man who is deeply addicted to morphine. He wears custom-made bright white uniforms covered in shiny metals he never truly earned in combat. He stands before Hitler and makes a monumental promise. He confidently declares that his massive air force will completely wipe the British fighters from the sky in just 4 short days. His ego is so massive that he makes a public joke to the press. He loudly states that if a single enemy bomb ever falls on the city of Berlin, the people can change his name to Meyer. Meyer is a very common and simple German name. It is a statement of absolute arrogance. Göring sends a massive armada of over 2,500 warplanes across the English Channel. The sky goes completely dark with the heavy shadows of the bomber planes. Göring expects the British defenders to panic and collapse under the sheer weight of the attack. But he fundamentally misunderstands the situation and the technology of his enemy. The British have secretly built a massive defensive wall along their green coastline, but this wall is not made of concrete or steel. It is made of invisible radio waves. They have constructed a network of strange-looking tall metal towers called the Chain Home System. To the German pilots flying high above, these towers look completely harmless and unimportant. But they are actually the very first large-scale radar network in the entire history of warfare. In the year 1940, radar technology is basically pure scientific magic. The tall towers send invisible pulses out over the cold ocean water. These pulses bounce directly off the incoming metal bodies of the German bomber planes. The signal bounces back to dark rooms hidden deep underground. Inside these secret rooms, young British women wear heavy headsets and stare at glowing green screens. They watch bright green dots slowly moving across the glass. They know exactly how many German planes are approaching. They know their exact altitude and their exact direction of travel. The German pilots think they are sneaking up to launch a devastating surprise attack. They are completely unaware that they are completely blind. The British command knows they are coming 30 minutes before they even see the coastline.
The British fighter pilots are incredibly young men, barely out of high school. They fly the rugged Hurricane and the beautiful and deadly Spitfire. Because of the magic radar system, they do not need to waste their precious aviation fuel flying circles in the sky looking for the enemy. The operators on the ground tell them exactly where the Germans are hiding in the clouds. The young pilots sit quietly in their leather chairs on the grass airfields. They drink warm tea and wait. Suddenly, the alarm bell rings loudly. They sprint to their airplanes and climb rapidly into the cold blue sky. They dive straight down out of the blinding sun and tear violently into the massive German bomber formations. The sky above the quiet English farms and sheep pastures instantly turns into a chaotic graveyard. The air is filled with the terrifying sounds of heavy machine gun fire and screaming engines. Burning metal debris and white parachutes fall slowly from the clouds. The German fighter pilots flying the deadly Messerschmitt planes are highly skilled veterans. But they have a massive and fatal problem. Their airplanes are very small and hold very little fuel. By the time the German fighters cross the channel and reach the city of London, they only have exactly 10 minutes of fuel left to fight. They must constantly watch their fuel gauges in pure panic. If they stay and fight for 11 minutes, their engines will die and they will crash into the cold, dark sea on the way home. The British pilots are fighting directly over their own homes. If a German pilot is shot down, he's captured by local farmers with pitchforks and spends the rest of the war in a prison camp. If a British pilot is shot down, he simply pulls his parachute and lands in a friendly field. He walks to the local pub, takes a train back to his base, and flies a brand new airplane that exact same afternoon. The cold mathematics of the battle slowly begin to destroy the German Air Force. Göring loses hundreds of his best and most experienced pilots. He becomes increasingly furious and humiliated. His bold promise of 4 days turns into long weeks of heavy mechanical bleeding. In a fit of pure blind rage, he makes a fatal strategic error. The German bombers were slowly and successfully destroying the British radar stations and military airfields. But Hitler and Göring suddenly order them to stop attacking military targets and to start bombing the civilian city of London at night. This massive mistake gives the exhausted British Air Force the critical time they desperately need. They quickly repair their broken concrete runways, and factory workers build hundreds of new fighter planes. Meanwhile, the city of London burns brightly in the dark night. Heavy explosive bombs reduce entire civilian streets to smoking piles of brick and dust. Thousands of innocent people are crushed in their beds. But the terror bombing completely fails to break the psychology of the British public. They sleep deep underground in the dirty subway stations. In the morning, they climb out of the dark holes, step over the dead bodies, sweep the broken glass from their shops, and go straight back to work.
Then the ultimate and most painful humiliation occurs for the German leadership. A small group of brave British bomber pilots fly their heavy planes all the way across the dark continent of Europe. They fly through the heavy anti-aircraft fire and drop high explosive bombs directly onto the capital city of Berlin. The citizens of Berlin are completely shocked as the explosions violently shake their homes. They run terrified into their deep concrete underground bunkers. The air raid sirens scream endlessly through the dark streets. In the cold, damp darkness of the shelters, the German civilians look at each other in pure disbelief. They start to quietly whisper and laugh. They start calling their Supreme Air Force commander by the simple name of Herr Meyer.
The Battle of Britain ends in a total and devastating strategic defeat for the massive German military machine. Hitler is forced to completely cancel his grand invasion plans. The untouchable German forces taste the bitter ash of their very first real defeat in the cold gray skies over the English Channel. The illusion of absolute global invincibility takes a massive and permanent crack. The island fortress of Britain remains completely unbroken. It stands defiant as a massive and dangerous thorn in the side of the new German Empire. This failure to secure the Western Front will eventually become a deadly and suffocating trap for the entire German nation.
The massive German war machine turns its full mechanical face towards the cold east. The target is the massive Soviet Union. Adolf Hitler is completely consumed by a dark ideological hatred. He chooses to completely ignore the fundamental rules of global military logistics. He launches Operation Barbarossa. It is a terrifying tidal wave of cold steel and human flesh. Over 3 million German soldiers cross the border in the summer of 1941. They bring 3,000 heavy tanks and 7,000 artillery guns with them. The front line of the invasion is incredibly long. It stretches for nearly 3,000 kilometers from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea. The initial shock is absolutely devastating. The Soviet army is completely paralyzed by the sudden and overwhelming violence of the attack. The famous blitzkrieg tactics work perfectly in the dry and hot summer weather. The fast panzer divisions race forward and surround entire Soviet armies. The steel trap closes quickly and without any mercy. The numbers of captured men are completely staggering to the human mind. In just a few short weeks, the Germans capture over 500,000 Soviet soldiers in single massive military pockets. The fate of these prisoners of war is a story of pure human horror. The German supply lines do not have enough food for millions of extra hungry mouths. The commanders do not care. They simply herd the prisoners behind open barbed wire fences and let them slowly starve to death in the dirty fields.
The German generals are highly confident and deeply arrogant. They look proudly at their tactical maps and calculate the driving distance to the capital city of Moscow. But they make a fatal geographical miscalculation that will doom their entire empire. They simply do not understand the sheer endless depth of the brutal Russian landscape. The maps on their wooden tables are lying to them. A thick line on a German map means a hard paved concrete street. A thick line on a Soviet map is just a wide dirt path cut through the deep, dark forests. The heavy German supply trucks drive violently over these rough dirt tracks. The delicate wheels and axles of the fine European trucks begin to break down very rapidly. The mechanical heart of the invasion starts to beat much slower.
Then, the Russian nature unleashes its first terrible and silent weapon. The autumn season arrives. The heavy gray rains begin to fall from the skies. The dry dirt paths instantly turn into deep, dark oceans of thick black mud.
The Russians call this terrible season the Rasputitsa. It literally means the time of no roads. The mighty German panzers sink deep into the heavy mud, right up to their metal bellies. The steel tracks spin endlessly, but the massive war machines do not move a single inch forward. The sticky mud swallows heavy artillery pieces and breaks the legs of the horses. The mud is so incredibly deep that supply horses literally drown, standing completely still in the middle of the road. The entire German invasion completely stops. The invincible lightning war is suffocated in a massive sea of wet dirt. The soldiers sit miserably in the cold rain and wait for the winter to harden the soft ground.
The mud finally freezes solid in November. The metal tanks can slowly roll forward again. But the temperature does not stop dropping. It falls quickly to minus 20 degrees. Then it falls to minus 30 degrees. By the month of December, it reaches a deadly minus 40 degrees Celsius. The German High Command made an incredible and historically stupid mistake. Hitler was so absolutely sure the war would end in the warm summer that he simply did not order thick winter clothing for his soldiers. The men are standing in the deep, freezing snow, wearing only thin cotton summer uniforms. The freezing reality of the front line is completely brutal. The terrified soldiers stuff old newspapers inside their thin jackets, trying to stop the biting winter wind. The human body begins to rapidly break down. Toes and fingers turn completely black with deep, dead frostbite. A young soldier falls asleep in a cold dirt trench and simply never wakes up again. The extreme desperation turns the proud German troops into savage scavengers. They use knives to strip the thick winter coats and warm felt boots from the frozen dead bodies of the Soviet soldiers. They wrap their freezing heads in stolen women's scarves and old dirt.
The extreme cold attacks the metal machines just as violently as the soft men. The high-tech German engineering completely fails in the brutal weather. The special synthetic oil inside the tank engines freezes into a solid, heavy block of ice. To start a Panzer in the dark morning, the crew must build a hot wood fire directly under the metal belly of the tank, just to melt the engine oil. If they make the fire too big, the entire tank suddenly explodes in a ball of hot fire. The sensitive firing mechanisms of the heavy machine guns freeze completely solid. When a freezing German soldier tries to shoot a charging enemy, his weapon just makes a dull and useless click sound. The expensive optical glass inside their sniper scopes shatters into tiny pieces from the extreme temperature drop.
While the men freeze and die, Hitler makes a disastrous strategic choice in his warm bunker. The fast panzer divisions are driving straight toward the very heart of the Soviet Union, but Hitler suddenly orders them to stop the advance. He splits his massive army into completely different directions. He sends one army group far north to surround and starve the city of Leningrad. He sends another massive force deep south to capture the golden wheat fields of Ukraine and the deep oil wells of the Caucasus. This terrible political decision delays the final deadly push toward Moscow by several critical weeks. While the men freeze and die, Hitler makes a disastrous strategic choice in his warm bunker. The fast panzer divisions are driving straight toward the very heart of the Soviet Union, but Hitler suddenly orders them to stop the advance. He splits his massive army into completely different directions. He sends one army group far north to surround and starve the city of Leningrad. He sends another massive force deep south to capture the golden wheat fields of Ukraine and the deep oil wells of the Caucasus. This terrible political decision delays the final deadly push toward Moscow by several critical weeks. By the time they finally turn their tanks back towards the capital city, it is far too late. The German front line is incredibly stretched and deeply exhausted. The soldiers are dying of cold and basic human starvation. They push forward in a final, desperate, mechanical crawl through the thick snow. A small group of German motorcycle troops manage to reach a frozen bus stop on the very edge of the city. Through their cold binoculars, they can clearly see the golden spires of the Kremlin shining brightly in the winter sun. It is only 20 kilometers away, but they cannot move a single step closer. The engine of the great German army is finally completely dead. Suddenly, the thick white snow in front of them violently erupts,
fresh and highly aggressive Soviet troops attack, screaming from the deep winter forests. These are the Special Siberian Divisions, brought directly from the Far East. They are heavily dressed in thick white winter camouflage. They wear heavy fur boots and warm padded jackets. Their simple weapons are designed with loose, heavy metal parts that never freeze or jam in the snow. They ski silently through the dark trees and absolutely slaughter the freezing German soldiers in their shallow, cold trenches. The invincible German machine is finally pushed violently backward. The old ghost of Napoleon stands quietly laughing in the frozen snow. The war is no longer a fast and glorious mechanical sprint. It has officially become a slow and agonizing death march.
The year is 1942. The summer offensive brings the German army to the edge of the Volga River. The city is called Stalingrad. Adolf Hitler becomes completely obsessed with this place. He wants to capture the city simply because it carries the name of his greatest enemy. He orders his massive 6th Army to take the city at any cost. The German Air Force bombs the city into a terrifying landscape of broken concrete and twisted metal. They think this massive destruction will make the capture easy. They are completely wrong. The heavy bombing creates the perfect defensive fortress for the Soviet soldiers. The mighty German panzer tanks cannot drive over the massive mountains of broken bricks. The war instantly changes from a fast mechanical sprint into a slow and agonizing meat grinder. The Germans call it the Rattenkrieg. This translates to the Rat War. The combat does not happen in open green fields. It happens inside ruined kitchens and dirty underground sewers. The front line is no longer a line on a map. The front line is a wooden door inside a dark apartment building. A Soviet sniper holds the bedroom. A German machine gun team holds the living room on the exact same floor. They kill each other through holes in the thin walls. The violence is deeply personal and extremely close.
In the absolute center of this dark hell stands a simple 4-story apartment block. It sits directly on the edge of a large open square. It has a perfect view of the river. A young Soviet sergeant named Yakov Pavlov is ordered to hold this building. He takes a small group of about 30 exhausted soldiers inside the ruined structure. They are completely surrounded by thousands of heavily armed German troops. The Soviet soldiers quickly turn the broken apartment into a deadly fortress. They knock small holes in the interior walls to move freely between the rooms without stepping into the open hallways. They place heavy machine guns in the dark basement windows. They place long anti-tank rifles on the destroyed roof. They surround the outside of the building with thick barbed wire and hidden explosive landmines.
The German army attacks the building every single day.
They send waves of elite infantry across the open square. The Soviet soldiers wait until the Germans are very close. Then they open a massive wall of fire from every single window. The German bodies pile up rapidly in the dirt square. The smell of rotting flesh becomes absolutely unbearable. The German commanders bring up their heavy tanks to blast the building. But the Soviet soldiers on the roof simply aim their anti-tank rifles directly downward. They shoot through the thin top armor of the German tanks. The heavy metal beasts catch fire and burn brightly below the windows.
The fighting inside the building is a pure psychological nightmare. The men do not sleep for days. The noise of the constant explosions makes their ears bleed continuously. When the German infantry manages to break through the front door, the fighting moves to the dark staircases. Men kill each other in the dark with sharp metal shovels and hunting knives. The blood flows slowly down the concrete steps. The soldiers fight desperately for a single broken toilet room or a small destroyed kitchen. A German soldier opens a wooden door and instantly takes a bullet to the face. The bodies are simply pushed out of the high windows because there is no time to bury them.
The small group of Soviet men fight inside this nightmare for 60 long days. They are completely cut off from heavy supply drops. They survive on tiny pieces of dried bread and dirty water. Sometimes they manage to find a small piece of old meat hidden in the rubble of the ruined kitchens. The German army throws everything they have at this single building. They drop heavy bombs from the sky. They use massive artillery guns to blast the brick walls into dust. But the structure somehow refuses to fall down. The brave Soviet soldiers simply refuse to die. This single broken apartment building holds out for 60 days. The entire mighty nation of France surrendered to the German war machine in just 46 days. A small group of 30 starving men with dirty rifles hold off the most powerful army in the world for a longer time than a massive European empire. The building becomes a legendary symbol of pure Soviet stubbornness. It breaks the psychological will of the German attackers. The mighty Sixth Army slowly bleeds to death in the ruined streets of Stalingrad. The hunters finally become the hunted. The cold winter is coming again, and the massive German trap is about to violently snap shut. The date is 13 June 1944. The massive Allied invasion force has finally landed on the beaches of Normandy. The heavy industrial weight of the British and American armies is slowly pushing into the green fields of France. The German army is heavily outnumbered in the air and on the ground, but they still possess a terrifying mechanical advantage on the close battlefield. This advantage is a massive, heavy metal beast called the Tiger tank. It is a true masterpiece of complex German engineering. It weighs over 50 tons and carries deadly, thick steel armor. It is armed with a massive 88mm cannon that can easily destroy any Allied tank from a very long distance. The Allied soldiers are absolutely terrified of this giant machine. They suffer from a massive psychological condition they call tigerphobia.
On this quiet morning, a long column of vehicles from the famous British 7 Armored Division is driving slowly down a narrow country road. They are moving towards a small French village called Villers-Bocage. The British soldiers are relaxed and feeling very confident. They stop their tanks and transport trucks close together on the side of the narrow road. The crews climb out of their metal machines to drink hot tea and stretch their tired legs. They do not know that a silent metal predator is watching them from the dark trees nearby. SS Tank Commander Michael Wittmann sits quietly inside the steel belly of his single Tiger tank. He is one of the most deadly and experienced tank aces of the entire global war. He looks through his thick optical glass and sees the entire British armored column parked completely exposed on the open road.
He makes a highly aggressive and completely insane tactical decision. He does not call for backup. He does not wait for the rest of his heavy tank company. He simply orders his driver to push the massive heavy engine forward. The giant Tiger tank suddenly breaks out of the thick green bushes. The heavy metal tracks crush the dirt as it rolls directly onto the main road. The British soldiers drop their warm teacups in absolute blind panic. They stare in pure horror as the massive gray box of thick steel moves aggressively towards them. Wittmann fires his deadly 88mm cannon at a very close range. The heavy explosive shell hits the lead British tank and blows the heavy metal turret completely off into the sky. The loud explosion echoes violently through the quiet French countryside. Wittmann does not stop moving. He orders his driver to drive the Tiger tank straight down the road, directly alongside the parked British column. The German gunner works like a perfect and heartless machine. He loads and fires the heavy cannon again and again. Every single shot is a direct and deadly hit. The thin armor of the British tanks and light transport vehicles rips open like cheap tin cans. Hot orange fire and thick black smoke instantly fill the narrow country road. The German tank commander also uses his heavy machine guns to tear through the soft transport trucks and the panicked infantrymen running for their lives. The mighty Tiger tank simply drives down the line and executes vehicle after vehicle in a perfect mechanical rhythm of complete destruction. The brave British tanks try desperately to fight back against the metal monster. They fire their smaller cannons directly at the flat sides of the heavy Tiger. But the Allied shells simply bounce off the thick German steel armor with a loud ringing sound. The Tiger tank is practically invincible against these small weapons at this close range. Wittmann drives his heavy machine directly into the center of the village of Villers-Bocage. He aggressively destroys several more armored vehicles hiding in the narrow stone streets. In less than 15 minutes, a single German heavy tank has completely destroyed over 14 British tanks and 15 transport vehicles.
the entire British military advance in this critical sector is completely stopped in its tracks by one single mechanical beast.
Whitman slowly reverses his smoking Tiger out of the burning village and disappears safely back into the thick, dark woods. It is a display of absolute tactical brilliance and terrifying mechanical superiority. It proves exactly why the German armored forces are deeply feared by every single soldier in the Allied armies. But this epic moment of individual destruction hides a very dark and fatal strategic truth for the entire German military. Whitman destroyed 14 tanks in a spectacular show of personal skill, but the massive industrial factories in the United States and the Soviet Union are building hundreds of new, cheap tanks every single day. The German factories are constantly bombed from the sky, and they desperately struggle to build just 10 new Tiger tanks in an entire week. The incredible German machines are technically perfect, but they are far too few. The simple and brutal math of the global industrial war has already doomed the brave tank aces to an absolute and final defeat.
World War II is not just a battle of brave men and clever generals. It is fundamentally a brutal war of simple mathematics and heavy industrial production. The German nation believes deeply in the absolute superiority of pure craftsmanship. Their engineers are total perfectionists. They design the most complex and advanced war machines the world has ever seen. The Tiger tank and the Panther tank are perfect examples of this dangerous obsession. They are beautiful and extremely deadly machines. They have very thick steel armor and massively powerful cannons. The optical sights inside the tanks are made from the absolute finest cut glass in the world. One single German heavy tank can easily destroy 5 or even 10 enemy tanks in open combat. The kill ratios are incredibly impressive on paper. But this extreme mechanical perfection comes with a very dark and fatal price. The German factories do not use modern mass production assembly lines. Highly skilled workers build each heavy tank almost completely by hand. They carefully weld the thick steel plates together like they are making an expensive luxury car. This slow process means the German military can only produce a few hundred heavy tanks every month. The internal mechanics of these machines are incredibly complicated. The heavy metal tracks have special overlapping wheels. These complex wheels constantly freeze completely solid in the cold Russian mud. If a heavy Tiger tank breaks its delicate transmission, it becomes a massive logistical nightmare. The exhausted mechanics must use heavy cranes to lift the massive metal turret completely off the vehicle, just to reach the broken gears hidden deep inside. This complex repair process takes many long days of hard physical labor. A broken German tank is basically completely useless to the army in a fast-moving war.
Far across the dark ocean, the United States takes a completely different approach to the global war. They do not care about building perfect war machines. They care only about simple math and overwhelming volume. The massive American car factories in Detroit completely stop building civilian vehicles. Millions of women enter the heavy factories to weld steel and build weapons. They create the famous Sherman tank. The Sherman is not a beautiful or perfect machine. It has relatively thin metal armor and a weak main cannon. One single heavy German Tiger can easily destroy a Sherman tank with one single shot. The American soldiers jokingly call their own tanks boiling pots because they catch fire so easily when hit by the enemy.
But the American military planners understand the real secret to winning a global industrial war. The Sherman tank is incredibly reliable and very easy to build. The massive American assembly lines produce these green metal boxes by the absolute thousands. They standardize every single mechanical part. If an American tank breaks down in a muddy field, a young mechanic can easily fix the simple engine in just a few short hours. If the tank is completely destroyed, the Army simply unloads 10 brand new tanks from a massive cargo ship the very next morning. The United States produces over 50,000 Sherman tanks during the Long War. The German factories only managed to build about 1,300 heavy Tiger tanks in the exact same time period.
The Soviet Union uses the exact same brutal mathematics in the Cold East. They designed the legendary T-34 tank.
It is rough and very uncomfortable for the brave crew. The metal welds are ugly and completely unfinished. The factory workers do not even bother to paint the inside of the heavy metal hull. But the T-34 is extremely fast and very heavily armed. The massive tractor factories in the Ural Mountains build these metal beasts day and night. The factory roof is often completely destroyed by German bombs, but the Soviet workers just keep building tanks in the freezing snow. They push the new tanks straight out the factory doors and directly onto the bloody battlefield. They produce over 80,000 of these simple killing machines.
The elite German tank commanders sit inside their incredibly advanced metal fortresses. They fight with absolute bravery and incredible skill. They destroy wave after wave of the green American and Soviet machines. The fields of Europe are completely covered with the burning metal wrecks of Allied armor. But no matter how many enemy machines the Germans destroy, there is always another heavy wave coming directly over the next hill. The brave German crews slowly run out of heavy ammunition. Their complex engines break down and they have absolutely no spare parts. Finally, their gas tanks run completely dry because the massive Allied bombers destroy the German synthetic oil factories. The beautiful and deadly German war machines simply stop moving. The war of perfection is completely crushed by the brutal and unstoppable weight of the massive global assembly line.
The date is 6 June 1944. The Western Front is about to explode. The Allied forces prepare the largest amphibious invasion in human history. They must cross the cold English Channel and break through the massive Atlantic Wall. The Atlantic Wall is a massive line of thick concrete bunkers and heavy artillery stretching across the entire coast of France. The German High Command knows the invasion is coming, but they do not know exactly where or exactly when. The British intelligence services create a brilliant and massive psychological deception. They call it Operation Fortitude. They build a completely fake military force. They call it the One U.S. Army Group. They place this fake army directly across the water from the French region of Pas-de-Calais. They build thousands of inflatable rubber tanks. They build fake wooden airplanes. They set up massive speakers that play the loud sounds of heavy military traffic. They generate thousands of fake radio messages. They even put the famous American general George Patton in charge of this imaginary army. The German spy planes take photographs of the rubber tanks from high in the sky. The German generals look at the photographs and completely fall into the trap. They send their best heavy tank divisions to Pas-de-Calais and wait for an attack that will never come. But there is a massive and almost comical problem. Hitler is sleeping deeply at his mountain retreat in southern Germany. He stayed up very late the night before talking to his friends. He took heavy sleeping pills. The frantic messages from the Normandy coast arrive at his headquarters early in the morning. The German generals on the front line are screaming into the telephones. They desperately beg for the heavy tanks. But the high-ranking officers outside the bedroom are terrified of his violent temper. They refuse to knock on the heavy wooden door. They refuse to wake the sleeping dictator. The most critical hours of the entire global war slowly pass by in absolute silence at the High Command.
Hitler finally wakes up around noon. He eats a slow breakfast. His generals finally tell him about the massive invasion. But Hitler is completely calm and entirely wrong. He is absolutely convinced that the Normandy landings are just a small fake diversion. He still firmly believes that the real massive attack will come at Pas-de-Calais. He refuses to send the heavy tanks to the burning beaches. He happily tells his friends that the Allies have finally fallen into his trap. He thinks he can easily destroy them on the coast. The German panzer sit silently in the dark woods and wait for an order that comes far too late.
The Allied soldiers slowly fight their way up the bloody cliffs. They clear the concrete bunkers with hot fire and heavy explosives. By the time Hitler finally realizes his massive mistake, the Allied forces have fully secured the beachhead. They unload thousands of real tanks and heavy artillery pieces onto the sand. The thick concrete wall is broken forever. The sleepy arrogance of one single dictator allows the massive liberation of Europe to finally begin. The German military is now forced to fight a massive war on two completely different fronts. This is the exact nightmare scenario they always wanted to avoid. The
The massive jaws of the Allied trap are now slowly closing around the dark heart of Germany.
The date is 22 June 1944. Exactly 3 years have passed since the massive German army crossed the Soviet border. The German generals are nervously watching the West. They are completely focused on the Allied invasion in Normandy. They firmly believe that the Soviet army is completely exhausted. They look at their maps and predict a quiet summer in the East. They are completely and fatally wrong. The Soviet High Command has prepared the largest and most destructive military operation in the entire history of warfare. They call it Operation Bagration. It is named after a famous Russian general from the 1800s. The scale of this attack is absolutely beyond human comprehension. The Soviet army secretly moves over 2.5 million men into the thick, dark forests of Belarus. They bring over 6,000 heavy tanks and 7,000 massive aircraft. They also bring an unbelievable 30,000 heavy artillery guns.
The German military intelligence completely fails to see this massive buildup. The Soviets use a special military doctrine called Maskirovka. It means absolute deception. They move their massive armies only under the cover of pure darkness. During the day, the soldiers hide deep under the thick green trees. They maintain absolute radio silence. The German spy planes fly over the silent forests and see absolutely nothing. Army Group Center is the most powerful German military force on the Eastern Front. It has over 800,000 experienced soldiers. They sit comfortably in their dry dirt trenches, they write letters to their families, and wait for a quiet summer. Then, the Earth suddenly, violently explodes.
The Soviet artillery barrage begins in the early morning. It is not just a bombardment, it is a man-made earthquake of fire and hot steel. 30,000 heavy guns fire at the exact same second. The noise is so incredibly loud that the German soldiers literally bleed from their ears. The thick concrete bunkers are instantly crushed into fine gray dust. The heavy wooden trees of the forest are blown completely into the sky. The heavy artillery fire lasts for 2 solid hours of pure, uninterrupted destruction. The German defense lines are completely erased from the face of the earth.
When the massive guns finally stop, the heavy Soviet tanks begin to roll forward. They do not attack in small groups. They attack in massive iron waves stretching for miles across the burning landscape. The German commanders desperately try to organize a defense, but their telephone lines are completely destroyed by the heavy bombs. The frontline units are completely cut off and entirely alone. The fast Soviet tanks break deep into the German rear areas. They capture the critical railway stations. They destroy the heavy supply bases. They trap the German army in massive pockets of pure chaos. Hitler makes another deeply fatal error from his warm underground bunker. The German generals beg for permission to retreat and save their men. But the dictator absolutely refuses. He issues a strict order of no retreat. He demands that the destroyed cities be held as solid fortresses. This stupid order sentences hundreds of thousands of German soldiers to a fast and violent death. The Soviet army completely surrounds these fake fortresses. They do not even stop their forward advance. They just leave heavy artillery units behind to slowly crush the trapped German troops. The German retreat quickly turns into a massive and completely panicked death march. The muddy roads are completely blocked by burning metal trucks and dead horses. The powerful Soviet Air Force controls the sky with absolute dominance. The heavy ground attack planes dive down and slaughter the retreating German columns with heavy machine guns and bright rockets. The thick forests of Belarus become a massive, bloody graveyard for the German military. The local Soviet partisan fighters hide in the thick bushes. They shoot the desperate German soldiers who try to escape into the dark woods. There is absolutely no mercy. The German army burned thousands of small Soviet villages during their brutal occupation. Now the angry Soviet soldiers are taking their extremely violent revenge.
In just 2 short weeks, Army Group Center is completely and totally destroyed. The German army loses over 400,000 men. This is a much bigger disaster than the terrible defeat at Stalingrad. It is the worst single military defeat in the entire history of the German nation. The massive Soviet army pushes forward for over 600 kilometers in just a few bloody weeks. They reach the wide rivers near the border of Germany. The road to Berlin is now completely wide open.
To prove their massive victory, the Soviet leadership organizes a special parade in the city of Moscow. They force over 57,000 captured German soldiers to march through the wide streets of the capital. The proud German generals march at the front, but their shiny uniforms are dirty and deeply torn. The Soviet citizens stand on the sidewalks and watch them in absolute silence. Following right behind the defeated German soldiers are small street cleaning trucks. They slowly wash the dirty streets with clean water to symbolically cleanse the city of the German presence. It is a moment of pure, absolute humiliation. The invincible German war machine is completely broken. The final bloody countdown to the death of the Third Reich has officially begun.
The date is 16 December 1944. The winter is incredibly cold. The thick snow covers the dark trees of the Ardennes forest. The American troops in this quiet sector are completely relaxed. They are young men with very little combat experience. They sit in their cold dirt trenches and wait for the warm Christmas holiday. They think the mighty German army is completely dead. They believe the brutal war is almost over. They are completely and terribly wrong. Adolf Hitler sits in his deep underground bunker and plans one final desperate gamble. He wants to split the Allied armies completely in half. He wants to capture the massive port city of Antwerp. He gathers his very last heavy panzer divisions in total secrecy. He completely strips the Eastern Front of its heavy weapons to fuel this mad dream.
The German attack begins with a massive and terrifying artillery barrage. Over 1,600 heavy guns violently shatter the quiet winter morning. The young American soldiers are completely shocked by the deafening noise. Then, the massive metal beasts emerge from the dark fog. The German army brings their absolute heaviest and most advanced weapons to this final fight. They deploy the terrifying King Tiger tank. It is a massive steel monster weighing over 68 tons. It has incredibly thick metal armor that cannot be penetrated by normal Allied weapons. The massive 88mm cannon can destroy an American Sherman tank from miles away. The American soldiers drop their light weapons and run in pure panic. The German advance creates a massive bulge in the Allied front line.
The weather is completely terrible. The sky is dark and filled with heavy, freezing rain. This bad weather is Hitler's greatest weapon. The powerful Allied Air Force is completely grounded. The massive bomber planes cannot fly in the thick winter fog. The heavy German tanks push deeper and deeper into the snowy forests. They surround the vital crossroads town of Bastogne. Over 18,000 American airborne troops are completely trapped inside the frozen town. They have very little food and almost no heavy winter clothing. The German commander sends a formal written message demanding their immediate surrender. The American general famously replies with one single word. He writes, "Nuts." The American soldiers refuse to break. They hold the frozen line with pure stubbornness and frozen blood.
But the massive German offensive has a very dark and fatal weakness. It is not a problem of enemy resistance. It is a problem of simple, fluid mathematics. The giant King Tiger tanks are completely terrifying on the battlefield, but they require massive amounts of synthetic gasoline just to move their heavy metal weight. The heavy German engine burns over 500 liters of precious fuel just to travel 100 kilometers. And the German Empire has absolutely no fuel left. The massive Allied bombing raids have completely destroyed all the major oil refineries in Germany. The mighty German war machine is literally running on empty.
Hitler bases his entire battle plan on a completely insane hope. He orders his fast tank commanders to capture the American fuel dumps hidden in the forest. He wants to use enemy gas to power his own heavy machines. But the retreating American soldiers are not stupid. They intentionally set fire to millions of gallons of their own precious gasoline. The German tank crews watch in absolute despair as massive walls of hot black smoke rise into the winter sky. Their only hope for survival burns away in the freezing wind. The heavy metal monsters slowly begin to cough and die.
The engines of the massive King Tiger tanks simply stop running. The quiet mechanical silence is more terrifying than the sound of enemy artillery. The powerful steel giants become useless metal boxes stuck in the deep snow. The German crews are forced to destroy their own beautiful machines. They drop heavy explosives directly down the main gun barrel to prevent the Americans from capturing them. The brave and elite German tank soldiers are forced to climb out of their metal fortresses. They leave the smoking 68-ton monsters on the side of the snowy road. They start walking slowly backward toward the dark German border on their own frozen feet.
Then the dark winter sky finally begins to clear. The bright sun shines brightly on the thick white snow. The massive Allied Air Force violently returns to the sky. Thousands of heavy fighter planes dive down like angry metal birds. They drop bright rockets and heavy bombs on the helpless German columns trapped on the narrow forest roads. The massive final offensive is completely crushed from the clear blue sky. The desperate gamble in the cold Ardennes forest totally fails. Hitler has wasted his very last heavy reserves in a completely impossible dream. The German army has absolutely nothing left to defend its own borders. The mechanical heart of the Third Reich finally stops beating in the cold white snow.
The year is 1945. The cold winter is gone and the muddy spring has arrived. The massive Soviet army is standing just 90 kilometers away from the capital city of Berlin. The end of the Dark Empire is extremely close. But there is one final natural wall standing between the angry Red Army and the German capital. It is a steep ridge of muddy hills called the Seelow Heights. The Soviet commander is Marshal Georgy Zhukov. He is a brutal and brilliant man. He brings a truly massive force to crush this final wall. He gathers over 1 million men in the dark forests. He brings over 3,000 heavy tanks and more than 9,000 heavy artillery guns. He plans to simply smash the German defense with absolute overwhelming force.
The German commander on the hills is General Gotthard Heinrici. He's not a famous tank commander or a political fanatic. He is a quiet and highly intelligent defensive expert. He knows perfectly well that he cannot defeat the massive Soviet army. His only goal is to delay the inevitable end and make the Soviets pay in heavy blood for every single inch of dirt. He has only about 100,000 exhausted men. Many of them are not even real soldiers. They're young boys from the Hitler Youth and old men from the civilian militia. They have very few tanks and almost no fuel. But Heinrici has a brilliant tactical mind. He carefully studies the Soviet military methods. He knows exactly how Zhukov likes to attack.
Heinrici knows the Soviets always begin a massive attack with a completely deafening artillery bombardment. They normally drop thousands of explosive shells on the frontline trenches to crush the defenders before the tanks roll forward. So Heinrici makes a highly dangerous and incredibly smart decision. In the deep darkness of the night, he secretly orders his frontline soldiers to quietly leave their trenches. They walk slowly backward and hide in the heavy woods on the higher hills. They leave the main defense line completely empty.
At exactly 3 in the morning, on 16 April 1945, the Soviet artillery violently explodes. Over 9,000 heavy guns fire at the exact same second. The bright flashes light up the dark sky like a terrible sunrise. The ground shakes violently for over 30 long minutes. The Soviet commanders smile in the dark. They firmly believe that nothing can survive that incredible storm of hot steel and fire. But they are completely wrong. The millions of heavy explosive shells are falling on completely empty dirt trenches. The German soldiers sit safely in the dark woods behind the hills and listen to the massive explosions. Heinrici has completely outsmarted the brutal Soviet tactic.
Then Marshal Zhukov tries a completely new and bizarre psychological weapon. He orders his men to turn on 143 massive anti-aircraft searchlights. He points the bright lights directly at the muddy hills. He wants to blind the terrified German defenders and show the way for his attacking tanks. But the battlefield is heavily covered in thick gray smoke and heavy dust from the artillery barrage. The bright light reflects directly off the thick dust cloud. It completely blinds the attacking Soviet soldiers instead. They cannot see where they are going. The massive, heavy tanks crash into each other in the bright white fog. The infantry soldiers fall into deep, muddy holes in pure confusion.
The German defenders watch this chaotic scene from the high hills. When the confused Soviet tanks get close, the Germans open a massive wall of fire. The young boys and old men use simple anti-tank rockets called Panzerfausts. They shoot the heavy Soviet metal beasts from hidden holes in the mud. The steep hills become a massive graveyard of burning green steel and dead bodies. The Soviet attack completely fails on the very first morning. Zhukov is totally furious. He is terrified of his own high command. He orders wave after wave of human flesh to charge directly up the steep, muddy hills. The slaughter is absolutely incredible. The battle rages fiercely for 3 long and incredibly bloody days. The German defenders fight with absolute, desperate perfection. They use every single tactical advantage of the high ground. But the brutal mathematics of the war finally take control again. Heinrici simply runs out of men and heavy ammunition. For every 1 Soviet tank, the Germans destroy 10 more, quickly climb over the burning wreck. The massive red wave simply washes over the thin gray line. The brilliant tactical mind of 1 single general cannot stop the absolute industrial weight of 1 million angry men. The final gate to Berlin is violently smashed open. The road to the dark heart of the Third Reich is completely clear. The final apocalypse is ready to begin. The date is April 1945. The 1,000-year empire is completely reduced to a few dark underground rooms. The massive capital city of Berlin is entirely surrounded by the angry Soviet army. The destroyed streets above are a pure chaotic hell of fire and falling concrete. Deep underground, Adolf Hitler sits in his cold, damp bunker. The smell of cheap cigarettes and heavy sweat and raw fear fills the dark air. The dictator is physically completely broken. His left arm shakes violently from constant disease. He stares blindly at a large paper map spread across a head.
He gives aggressive and loud orders to General Felix Steiner. He commands Steiner to launch a massive counterattack and push the millions of Soviet soldiers out of the ruined city. The surviving generals in the dark room look at each other in pure, terrifying silence. They know the absolute dark truth. Steiner does not have an army. The army only exists inside the broken mind of the failing dictator. The grand counterattack is a complete and total delusion. Reality finally crashes violently through the thick concrete ceiling. Hitler receives the news that Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Göring are trying to secretly negotiate peace with the Allied forces. Hitler explodes into a blind, violent rage. He aggressively declares his oldest and most loyal friends to be absolute traitors. The psychological collapse is entirely complete. The end is absolutely unavoidable. Hitler finally decides to end the massive nightmare. He tests a small glass capsule of deadly cyanide poison on his favorite German shepherd dog, Blondie. The innocent dog dies instantly on the cold concrete floor. He then marries his longtime companion Eva Braun in a strange and very quiet ceremony.
The very next afternoon, they lock the heavy metal door of their private room. A single loud gunshot violently echoes through the quiet, damp hallway. The loyal guards carry the dead bodies up the dirty concrete stairs into the ruined garden above. They pour thick liquid gasoline over the bodies and set them completely on fire. The supreme god of the Dark Empire burns silently in the dirty gray rubble of his broken capital. The Soviet artillery shells continue to completely crush the city blocks around the burning bodies. The war is effectively completely over.
But the strange, violent story of the global war has one final, completely absurd chapter. The date is 5 May 1945. Hitler is completely dead. The capital is completely gone. But deep in the beautiful green mountains of Austria, a truly bizarre battle is about to begin. It takes place at a massive medieval stone fortress called Castle Itter. The High Castle is a special security prison for very important French prisoners. It holds former prime ministers and famous generals, and even a professional tennis star.
A fanatical unit of heavily armed SS troops decides to attack the old castle and execute all the important prisoners before the war totally ends. The French prisoners urgently need desperate help. They find a completely unexpected savior. A brave German Wehrmacht officer named Major Josef Gangl completely hates the brutal SS troops. He decides to protect the innocent French prisoners from his own countrymen. He takes his small group of tired German soldiers and walks carefully down the mountain to find the advancing American army. He waves a white flag of surrender and asks the American soldiers for immediate military help. A fanatical unit of heavily armed SS troops decides to attack the old castle and execute all the important prisoners before the war totally ends. The French prisoners urgently need desperate help. They find a completely unexpected savior. A brave German Wehrmacht officer named Major Josef Gangl completely hates the brutal SS troops. He decides to protect the innocent French prisoners from his own countrymen. He takes his small group of tired German soldiers and walks carefully down the mountain to find the advancing American army. He waves a white flag of surrender and asks the American soldiers for immediate military help.
An American tank commander named Captain John Lee agrees to join this completely crazy mission. They drive one single American Sherman tank up the steep mountain road. The heavy tank is named Besotten Jenny. The American soldiers and the German soldiers walk closely together. Yesterday, they were bitter, deadly enemies trying to kill each other. Today, they are fighting proudly, shoulder to shoulder. They reach the old stone castle and prepare for the massive attack.
The fanatical SS troops arrive with heavy weapons and anti-tank guns. The battle begins with intense, violent fury. The American Sherman tank blocks the main wooden gate. The SS troops fire a massive 88mm heavy explosive shell directly into the tank and completely destroy it. The American soldiers and the German soldiers shoot down at the SS troops from the high stone walls. The older French prime ministers grab discarded rifles and join the wild, bloody fight. It is the most surreal moment in the entire history of modern war.
Major Gangl runs quickly across the open stone courtyard to save a French politician from heavy enemy fire. A deadly SS sniper shoots the brave German officer directly in the head. He dies instantly on the cold, hard stone. He gives his life to save the people he previously conquered. Finally, a much larger American military force arrives at the castle and completely crushes the SS attackers. The bizarre Battle of Castle Itter is officially over. It is the only time in the entire long global war where American and German soldiers fought together on the exact same side. It is the absolute final shot of the massive European nightmare. The dark, massive fire finally burns out completely. Over 60,000 human beings are completely dead. The ruined continent of Europe is split violently in half by cold iron and dark ideology. The blind arrogance of one single dictator destroyed the entire modern world. The massive German military machine was ultimately crushed by simple, heavy industrial numbers and terrible logistical reality. The grand 1,000-year empire lasted exactly 12 bloody years. The epic tragedy is finally over.